Hey everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about why you should travel off the beaten path and why you should travel to lesser known and less touristy areas, also known as over-tourism. And before we get started on what I actually want to talk about, what I don't mean is that I don't mean you should be like roughing it and traveling off the grid. You can totally still travel to tourist destinations and spectacular, beautiful places and stay in hotels and stuff like that. You can still travel comfortably. But what I mean is that we should try not to contribute to over-tourism. Rather, avoid the crowds, avoid the touristy areas, and give the lesser known areas a chance. I got the inspiration for this video when I watched a video by Currently Hannah. I will leave her channel in that video linked down below. She talked about over-tourism in Japan, especially with the Olympics coming up, and so I was inspired to talk about this just as a broad topic in general and why over-tourism is contributing to climate change. You've probably heard this disclaimer several times if you watch my videos, but there's construction going on right now. We still have 2 months of construction, so as you can probably hear Mochi back there, right on cue. But basically, she is a combination of in heat / lonely because her friend just left her the other day. So I can't just not film because she's nuts. So we're gonna keep this going. It's a long disclaimer, sorry. Over-tourism is when there are too many travelers in one area. It makes traveling not as enjoyable and completely unsustainable in that location. A big one I'm sure you've heard of is Venice. Over-tourism has a big negative effect on the environment. It leads to an increased water consumption, air pollution, litter, and other waste in tourist destinations. Over-tourism can also have an adverse effect on locals. Again, this is not regular tourism, it's over-tourism. Tourism can be great for the economy, but over-tourism is when it gets really bad for the environment and for the locals. It can cause excess traffic, excess noise, and the environmental issues can have an impact on these areas. I have heard stories of quiet and pristine beaches now being overrun with tourists and litter. Now there's more light and air pollution, there's less nature, and there's more garbage in these areas. This is happening in places like Bali, Iceland, Santorini, Venice, South Thailand, and even in my current home of Okinawa. Okinawa recently, before the coronavirus, became the #1 tourist destination in the world. Hotels and resorts are popping up left and right on the beaches. It is taking away from the beauty, adding more light and noise pollution, and more litter as well. People once traveled here to see the beaches and the pristine waters that are now being affected by pollution. And I think this topic really hits home for me now that I get to live in such a beautiful area that has now become overrun with tourists. I guess that's one of the bright sides of the coronavirus, is that now that that is happening and Japan is kind of a hot spot, less and less people are traveling here. So it might be sad for some of the less touristy areas up in the mainland of Japan, but for cities like Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, and even here in Okinawa, it is kind of good to get a break from all the tourists. I think having less tourists this year due to the coronavirus will actually help restore some of the environment, as well as just some of the cities that have been overrun with tourists and litter that comes with it. Here are some tips that you can use to help combat over-tourism. You can travel in off-peak season. An example of peak season would be like cherry blossom season in Japan, or like winter in Florida, like Christmas break. Those are just 2 examples. As pretty as the cherry blossoms are in Japan, Japan is also a beautiful time for the fall foliage, beautiful in the summer. There are so many opportunities with each tourist destination that you can choose instead of traveling during the peak season. You can stay in eco-friendly accommodation. And how you can do this is you can, 1, not choose big chain hotels. I will be making a video in the future about the wastefulness of hotels and why you should avoid them and other types of accommodation you should be choosing, so stay tuned for that. So some obvious options would be an Airbnb, a hostel, or just smaller hotels. But if you're feeling a little more advanced, you can actually check eco ratings for some hotels. Some actually get a green rating. I don't know the actual foundation that does the ratings. I will leave that link down below if I find it. But what happened was when I was doing my research for the hotel video, I was actually researching just green hostels, why hostels are green, why hostels are eco-friendly, and a lot of lists came up, actual certified green or eco-friendly hostels in Europe or in Asia or wherever you might be looking. So if you're feeling advanced about that, be sure to just Google search before you book your accommodation. You can also follow all of my other low-waste travel hacks. I will leave all of my resources linked down below, but I have how to pack light and why you should pack light, my zero-waste travel essentials, and other tips that you can follow to reduce your waste while traveling. While you are traveling in that area, be sure to choose local businesses instead of supporting large chains. This is not only great for the local economy, but smaller businesses typically make things homemade and they typically use more sustainable resources and more ethical practices as well. While you're traveling, be sure to use public transportation. And I made a video all about this as well, the importance of taking public transportation and why you should use it when you can. Not only while you're traveling, you can use it at home for your local commute, but while you're traveling, if you can, avoid flying, but if not, I don't blame you. I still fly. Video on that coming soon. I've been saying that for a while, but I promise it's coming. But when we get to our tourist destination, if we do have to get a rental car, we're sure to try to pick an eco-friendly one. And when possible, we take trains and buses and taxis and other sustainable sources of traveling as well. Be courteous to locals and the environment. And this has to do with noise pollution. Don't be loud when you're a tourist, especially if you're a Westerner. I could go on about this. I even notice myself being incredibly loud sometimes. It's just a in our nature as Americans, and the Japanese nature is to be very quiet. You'll stand out here if you're an American traveling in Japan. But not only that, be sure to get rid of your trash responsibly, recycle if possible, don't throw it on the ground. Of course, don't vandalize anything, try not to like step on the plants and other wildlife, and just be respectful to the country that you're going to, or the state, or wherever. Just be respectful wherever you go. Visit lesser known areas. Lesser known areas are great as well because you can go to those in peak season. For example, if you want to see cherry blossoms in Japan, instead of going to Kyoto, go to Nara or one of the other, I wish I knew more off the top of my head, go to other surrounding areas, pick a smaller city, and chances are it's going to be even more beautiful anyways, and you're going to get better pictures because there's less people. And instead of visiting the mainland of Okinawa, be sure to visit the other islands as well. And honestly, pro tip, if you're coming to Okinawa is not that great. So it is the biggest island, and it is the one that you do have to fly into, but you can ferry to a lot of the other smaller islands. Still have pristine aqua blue waters, they've got white sand, they've got little mom and pop shops, the food is fantastic, the souvenirs are great, snorkeling is better, the wildlife is more wild, there's more plants, more jungle. I love the little islands here, they're so cute. And not that Okinawa is terrible, but it is overrun with tourists and it's just not as pretty as it used to be. Another tip is to not geotag the areas that you go to. And I'm not saying don't geotag like Tokyo, Japan, you can let people know that you're in Tokyo if you want, but don't geotag Shibuya crossing. That's a pretty bad example because that it's the busiest pedestrian crossing in the world. That was just the first thing I could think of. And as terrible as it sounds, it's probably not that bad if you still want to geotag the tourist areas like Fushimi Inari Shrine or the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, Mount Fuji. Like, it's not gonna make more people go there. So I guess that's the point. The tourist destinations, people are gonna go there whether it's geotagged and getting more and more popular or not. Smaller shrines, smaller beaches, and other things like that, try not to geotag those because that just attracts more and more tourists, which can lead to vandalism, more litter, and other sources of pollution. This reminded me of a specific example in Okinawa, actually. Beautiful. I never got to go to it, but this beautiful area, a gigantic cliffs on either side, and it was this walkway down to the beach. The sand was perfectly white, the waters were so blue, and it was just so magical. But it became a victim of geotagging, which led to vandalism, which led to litter, and it was a place of worship for the locals, and it was destroyed by tourists. And so now this really special place actually had to be shut down. I think when a lot of these things hit closer to home for you, it really helps you to be able to make these changes. And of course, the last tip is to follow the rules. And this is pretty simple. Don't be loud in residential areas. Don't litter. Use the correct trash bins and recycle bins. It doesn't really combat over-tourism, but it can combat the effects of over-tourism. Like I mentioned earlier, over-tourism brings a lot of threats to the environment. So that is the big one for me especially, and I feel like a lot of you are on the same wavelength as well, that you want to combat over-tourism and to be better for the environment. But not only this, some other added benefits are that you get to avoid the crowd, therefore you get to take better photos and videos if you so choose. You get to avoid overpriced tourist garbage. Sometimes there are good souvenirs in touristy areas, but a lot of times it is overpriced. You don't have to worry about the risk of finding a flight, finding transportation, and finding accommodation, and you do get a more authentic experience. This is why in my travel video from Takayama, you can check that out right here, I talk about why I recommend skipping the big cities in Japan and going to the countryside, especially if you're one, not into city life, and two, you actually want to get to see Japan for what it actually is. The city life is kind of stereotypical Japan, lots of bright lights, lots of fun outfits, all that other stuff. That's not real Japan. There's just so much more history and culture and authenticity when you go outside the city, you go to the lesser known areas, and you kind of get to experience life as a local for a little bit. So for example, Venice. I'm sure everyone's heard of Venice, and I'm sure everyone knows that you can take canal boat rides there. And these boat rides are increasing more and more in popularity, and therefore the waves that the boats create are washing away the walls that are holding up buildings. As far as I remember, like the last couple years, every year Venice gets flooded. So that has to do with rising ocean levels, but the constant erosion at these walls at an excess rate sure isn't helping, and a lot of these buildings are at risk for sinking. I noticed this in Thailand as well, which is kind of the same. Bangkok is another city that is built on canals and rivers, and we actually took a riverboat tour there. We kind of got scammed into it by our tuk-tuk driver. I would not recommend doing it. It wasn't bad, but because we did that experience, I'm a strong believer in that everything happens for a reason, and because we did that experience, we got to see kind of like the back streets of Bangkok and see people's actual houses that some people were actually still living in actively falling into the canals. And again, that is because of rising ocean levels, which increases the water in the rivers, as well as the excess traffic on the water is causing more and more waves, which is eroding the walls and the shore that is holding these houses up. Another issue we have seen here in Okinawa, as well as other tropical destinations, destinations is the decrease in coral life. Warmer water temperatures, more tourists wearing sunscreen, and more litter entering our water has a really adverse effect on our coral reefs. I actually stumbled upon a coral restoration project here in Okinawa. I will try to find them and leave them linked down below if you're interested in donating, but it is just a local place that they go out and snorkel, they pluck out little pieces of coral, and then they plant them, and I guess kind of harvest them and help them grow, and once they're healthy they replant them back into the ocean, and over 10 years, it does take a while but it does work, over 10 years coral reefs completely restore, and it is just incredible. But just because there is a solution does not mean that we need to care about the impact. It means that we need to stop the coral degradation in the first place. Another environmental impact that over-tourism has on areas, for example in Machu Picchu, is the trail that leads to the mountain is becoming more and more eroded because more and more people are visiting. This happens in national parks and other places as well. Another thing I want to talk about is getting that insta-famous shot like in the Fushimi Inari Shrine, which I mentioned earlier. That is the 1,000 plus lines of torii gates in Kyoto, and it is really spectacular to get to witness. But if you search this on Instagram, I'm gonna search it right now. So Fushimi Inari is tagged 467,000 times as a hashtag. You're not unique if you go here and you take a picture. Look at all of these. Like I said, it is cool to go witness these famous places, but you're not gonna be unique if you post this on your Instagram. Try to be unique, try to find somewhere that's just as cute, just as Instagram worthy, and go there instead. Again, I'm not saying that travel is bad, I'm not saying that tourism is bad. They can have very great effects on society, on the economy, but it has to be done correctly. Sustainable tourism is just that. It is tourism that boosts the economy. It allows for tourists and locals alike to travel and live comfortably in that area. It allows us to not disturb the local culture, the nature, and the atmosphere. And of course, it allows us to not disturb the environment and have a less adverse effect on it. That's all I have on this topic. Let me know down below how you combat over-tourism and what are your favorite less touristy areas. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to check out my Instagram and my blog. And of course, until next time, remember that these small changes you make have a big impact in the long run. Bye guys. Why do I never read what I'm gonna talk about before I start speaking? But she talked about overpopulation, not overpopulation, and why overpopulation, over-tourism. It can cause Yike. Iceland? Did I call it Iceland? Became the number one. Oh my gosh. Can be sad for those less, just let that pass. I really hope that this microphone is less sensitive than the one on my phone, because when I record her on Snapchat, she is so loud. Just one of these areas, which is to, thank you airplanes. I just want to record these videos. It's my only day to do so. Avoid the crowd, therefore you get to take. Thailand is another city that's built on canals and rivers. Thailand is not a city. Everything is so loud. Right on cue, ma'am. It allows for the locals and the tourists. I wish I was recording. I literally said, okay, it's quiet now. And then that machine started. I just need to do the outro. Let me know. Oh my gosh.